Very good. So welcome all. I think it's not a huge group of people, so if you are not in a noisy space and you want to unmute, please feel free. If you are in a noisy space or you have a lot of interference, if you stay muted. If you want to say something, if you raise up your hands, then I'll just help by just kind of pulling people into the conversation as and when. And if there's anything that pops into your head that feels like it's connected to the conversation but is to the side, or there's a resource you want to share, stick it in the chat. I am going to hand over a little bit to you, Angeliki, if you would like to share a bit about what happened in your process.
Thank you. Hello again. So yes, it's been already, I think it's been almost 2 months since the Aerial meeting, in which also Alice was part too. She's now with us. It was like, we were about, I think, 10 people from different cities and countries. So this was also interesting because like it wasn't all, like the main discipline, it wasn't for all the aerial skill, but there were also other things. So yes, so now I was trying this few weeks to make this booklet. So I think I will go to share the screen directly for the booklet if this is okay, and I will also speak on that. Yeah, share screen. So yes, so hopefully now everyone can see my screen. Yes. So after we had our first meeting online, I was trying by the end of each session to catch up with several questions, that these were our tasks, where we had either to write or create a video, or anyone was, so I was, instead of trying to have a plan and put up questions, after our conversation, questions were coming up, and then we had to write. So the first one was, what am I hanging from? And we had this common Google Drive where everyone was uploading their writings. And so in this booklet, in each page, at the end, like by here, you can see the name of each one who wrote it. Hopefully I will make it more official, and then everything will be also in a nice credential way. And yeah, so this is different people writing their thoughts on the question, what am I hanging from? I was trying to keep the format as the same with what they were sending. Like here also, it's a mix of languages. I could also later, hopefully I will publish, I will make it public so everyone can go a bit more into details. Things were a bit, at some point, they were more like poetical or more structural feeling, but still it was nice to see that everyone was thinking on a different way, and this was quite poetic in the meaning of creation. And then we had, this was also fun, like we had this session where everyone was writing on the Zoom, depending on what we were discussing. So then we had this kind of poem that came up only from really quick, fast writing in the chat Zoom, but this was also nice because we were sharing this time. So somehow we were creating a common language of communication. And then the second task was the interpretation of the self, where we had to go into a description of trying to put our methods of creating into another way, non-physical one. And this, it was interesting, like people came up with like guidelines, very clear things of how they're working, or trying also this to interpret it for us, so everyone could take a task and do something with this on their own spaces. Some other were really like we had also some diagrams or ways of how you can document your work. Yeah, so also different ways, like all these images are from different people. So it was also a nice pool of knowledge to understand that common practices, they are starting from a totally different start, and everyone is working on another way that can be also very useful to each other. And then we're like, it was another task, what is your reality? And then again, we had this small of things of poem and like essays maybe. So this is the main part. I will stop sharing maybe. Yeah, so, and then there were also, we had this video thing where one of the participants wanted to try out a thing, like how a performance can work via video. And this was quite interesting because in the same time was very like strange, like watching someone performing on video for you and what was all this. And like, to me personally, now that I had to make all this, the booklet, and really just go back into the experience, I had this like really getting things that they were linked. And now it felt like somehow as I was doing my artistic research on something that I didn't know that I was researching on. So this booklet is somehow like a documentation of practices and methods that somehow, if this online thing didn't happen, I wouldn't have done the thing. And the second, it was like, it felt, although that all these years were so much into this social thing with videos and images, because we created this environment of online meeting, that it was very clear that it's these people who want this thing. Somehow I was reevaluating all this consuming of images, and because people were sharing photos or videos of their everyday life because of COVID and this thing, I was much more interesting to really see what the image was. It wasn't just this Facebook or Instagram thing. So it was again a reevaluation of going online, but now it felt a bit more interesting and important to really see and watch all this information. Yes, I think this is it pretty much. Try to keep it short.
Okay, Angeliki, that booklet was extraordinary. I can't wait until you publish it so I can have a copy in my hand and read through it. The floor is open to anyone who has questions. Sherry, did you put your hand up? So if you have a question, jump in. I'd be really interested to hear a little bit from Alice about what the experience was like for you, if you're happy to share.
Yeah, sure. I wasn't expecting to talk about it, so I haven't really thought, but it was amazing because it was, for us, it was very early on. I think for Angeliki and a lot of the other people who were in it, they'd already been in lockdown for, I don't know how long, but maybe kind of 3 weeks or a month. Yeah, so we'd been in it for like a week or 2 weeks. So for me, it was this whole kind of new, I was still in the mode where it was a bit like, what the fuck's going on? And it was amazing and also amongst the kind of fear of, not being able to train and not being able to get together with people and create and have those spaces to go to anymore. It was, and I did have the intention of going to the physical meeting in Greece, but I actually wasn't able to in the end. So it was a kind of amazing thing to have right at the beginning of lockdown, to be in a space with people, other creators, and to have Angeliki as this amazing kind of creating this amazing thing. It was really interesting as well in terms of doing it through Zoom, and like as Angeliki said, someone did a performance which was kind of extraordinary and quite uncomfortable at times, and felt quite voyeuristic. And again, like for me, it was very early on, so I wasn't really used to this kind of Zoom context, so it felt very strange. Yeah, I don't really know. It was great to be able to have a space to get inspired in as well by other artists, and them giving the materials they were working on, and being able to share your own and sort of develop your own ideas, and have kind of endless conversations that were really constructive and inspiring. And I think we all got a lot out of it in terms of, you know, giving each other information and links and kind of ideas and things. So yeah, I don't really know what else to say, but it was amazing.
So that was interesting. Some people had access to equipment and some people didn't. How can either of you say a bit more about that? How did that fit together?
I think like before the aerial meeting started, like there were people who had this access, but I think by the time we started on, it was quite clear that we don't need the access on the equipment. So no one actually was going into the equipment. It was more about the thinking, the process, and the artistic body itself. And this was quite, for me at least, very important, because when I was thinking to have the aerial meeting online in a physical space, it was, I had this anxiety that at the end it's not going to be very experimental, because, you know, at the end the trick will be needed and everyone will need to have the trick. While in this online, is the sound very weird? Do you hear the noise? Okay, give me a second.
Somebody's about to get told off, I feel.
I'd say what was really interesting about that as well is I did actually have equipment at home, but felt very kind of demoralized and didn't really want to get onto it. And it was really interesting just being left with your body and whatever was around you in your own house, and thinking of different ways that can be used, and be used in a similar way that we use our bodies with Aerial anyway.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right.
And also somehow it feels in the online, in this virtual thing, is not only about the meeting, but generally I felt it during the lockdown, that somehow at the end you're more yourself than in a physical space, because like you don't have any tool to access something else. It's only your thoughts and how you, like, it's this frame of your face, and at the end there is no trick there. And it felt really nice because no one had the need to go into the technical or into the trick thing or what is important. It was just this patience of waiting what the time will bring, and it was just really open, I felt, for everyone.
I think that's really fascinating. Okay, I'm going to pull Lee in a little bit because you've been doing some experimentation as well, haven't you? Lee's looking at me like, why?
Hello.
Cool.
Yeah, no, just kind of a few variations on like what you were saying about performance and that kind of experience of being kind of awkward or feeling like heuristic. Like I've kind of seen a few different variations on live performance now, and they do have like totally different tones or different like experiences, both as a performer and as an audience. And I think it's worth really being aware of the relationship that the performer has to the audience in that way. Like, I mean, the ones I've kind of had experience so far, I kind of put into two different categories about whether you feel like the audience is in the room with you or not in the room with you. So something like a Facebook Live video, whether it's pre-recorded act or live act or whatever, like the audience is like in a very different, like the interaction or the lag between audience interaction, like you might be able to do comments or thumbs up or hearts or stuff like that, but it feels a lot less direct than, for example, having the audience in a Zoom call with you. But also that has a certain set of expectations that you're placing on the audience, which I know from hearing my mum freak out about the idea of coming to a show where she's in a Zoom call, like isn't necessarily a thing that everybody's comfortable with. So I think that's the other side to that coin. And I think kind of some of the more successful ones, or one of the ones I'm really interested in, is like a hybrid idea. So I kind of started to be involved in some like halfway variations where perhaps you have a live audience in a Zoom call, but then the whole thing is on a platform like Facebook Live or YouTube or something where you can have an audience that is just watching the television, and having different layers of audience, I think can be quite a good middle ground, because you know, it's not really practical to say have 200 people in a Zoom call and everybody unmuting and going crazy, and you know, it's quite a hard thing to manage. Whereas if you have, you know, maybe a smaller group in a Zoom call, and then you know, you can have a much larger audience outside of that, it kind of seems to be quite an interesting middle ground. And I think all are interesting in different ways, but just the experience I've had is that they're totally different levels of interaction for an audience.
So so you're a juggler, so you have the tools of your trade, as it were, accessible to you. I'm really interested, how many people here have had access to their core skill whilst they've been in lockdown? So if you're, yeah. So if you're an aerialist, have you been able to access aerial equipment? If you're a juggler, have you been able to juggle at home? Okay, because I'm really fascinated in the idea of what you do in this space when you have the tools of your trade to hand, but also what you do when you don't. And you have to kind of adapt the way that you're working or your working practices, much like Angeliki was talking about in her process. You have to adapt those practices to a space that you're not used to working in. Don't be shy, folks. Nicole, and then Amy.
Just going off of how you use your equipment or things differently, is that everything's so different circumstantially as well to what you might be used to, so not having people around you, or maybe not having as much safety as you would have to take a risk where you normally would take a chance in a training space and stuff. So you end up in like these really strange this kind of timid relationship with your equipment, because you are not used to having like less safety, and then like your relationship, your view of it, everything just changes so much in this change of space. Yeah. That's all I was gonna add.
Amy, and then Susan.
Me and Nicole have been doing rehearsals on Zoom for a kind of digital project that we're doing, and I don't have access to any aerial stuff, and it's been interesting in terms of like the way that we've been working and kind of feeding off each other, but also I guess it helps. I've noticed more like thinking more about character development and all of those elements that maybe come a little bit later in my thought process normally are kind of coming earlier because I don't have another option. so in that sense, I think it's quite useful. Yeah.
Susan.
So I'm not a circus artist, but I am a choreographer and a dancer and perform with upswing when we can. Just really interesting. First of all, Angeliki, the book "What Am I Hanging From?" really beautiful. I look forward to reading that as well. Just because I've been thinking a lot about what is coming out of this time and how processes are having to change and shift. Often we're asked to make work really quickly in a very short period of time, and if it's circus based, it's going to be get your tricks out and so on. What we're being forced to do is tap into all this incredible creativity and actually rethink choreographic, artistic, dramaturgical structures, potentially then to bring them into the real world, hopefully, and make some really amazing work. I mean, when you take away the physical thing that you're hanging from, then it has to become poetic. It has to become a metaphor for something else. And that opens up all sorts of other things that tell stories and that inspire different things. And it maybe makes you think differently about when you're going to be hanging, that hanging takes on a different meaning. My experience with Upswing last year, so I have some knee issues, and working with my partner, we're having difficulties just doing something that for you guys would be really simple, me just standing on his arms. But there was one time doing it that I discovered the significance for me in that risk. For you guys, it wouldn't be a risk anymore, but for me, it was still always a risk. And there was something in the drama of that made that moment meaningful. And it's something about rediscovering meaning that comes from a different thought process than the ones we're used to using. And there's also with these connecting in other ways and thinking in other ways, that I've found an analogy with sort of choreographic structures by working in the Zoom room, or sort of getting inspiration for pieces of work, even though we can't make them yet, but the inspiration and the creativity is extraordinary. That's all I think I have to say.
Thank you very much. Rebecca, you've got your hand up, and then I think Natalie, you had something as well you wanted to share.
Just quickly, just going back to, because I didn't have access to equipment at the beginning, and then someone kindly lent me a ring. Yay! I guess in going before pre-COVID, I was just kind of in this cycle of just like training, obsessed with like doing lots of tricks and aerial and making sure I was constantly training that and kind of forgetting about my body, kind of focusing more on the equipment. And I think I've danced a lot more. I've kind of focused on me as a body on the ground, and my body feels so much better. I guess less in an artistic way, but I mean, in just a kind of physically healthy and, you know, learning about me on the floor a bit more. But that's just from my point of view.
Cool. Excellent. Natalie, you've shared some stuff in the chat box. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I did, I was meant to do an outdoor aerial project, and I got the money from the Arts Council and then lockdown. But they luckily said that I could do an online project. Now, all the aerialists are stuck indoors, no equipment, no rig. And so we did something different every day. And it was amazing and fascinating. And I made lots of little videos about those different things that we explored. And I've shared the link in the thing. And I think from also hearing from everyone else has been doing, I can kind of break what's going on down into lots of different things. Like, we've got this whole new medium, and it's like, what's the purpose of this medium is one of these categories. Are we using it to rehearse, or are we using it as an audience? Are we using it as an interactive thing? So there's this kind of purpose and management of the medium. Then there's how you interact with the medium. As Lee was saying earlier, like, do you look at the camera? Are you performing to the camera? Or is the camera capturing what you're doing? So there's this whole artistic realm about what the lens is for. So you've got that section there. Then you've got this kind of artistic exploration of your equipment. Like, how does this medium that now we're using highlight your equipment differently? How can you use this medium in an artistic way to to get to your purpose, to highlight your art and your equipment and your skill in a way that you can't do in the world otherwise. And then, as Rebecca was saying, that you've got this set space where you can really just go, well, what is me as an artist? Who am I bringing into this art? Why am I bringing into this art? So there's these kind of different levels going from audience to medium to equipment to artist. And we're really kind of seeing how these things separate in this time. And they're becoming these distinct areas that you're going, oh, I didn't even realize that actually existed. And I think there's so many possibilities with all these different combinations. You can just go down one route. Like when I was doing my project, I was really kind of looking more at what these artists, who these artists are as circus performers, and how being a circus performer is you apply yourself differently physically and mentally to different things, and how you can be a circus performer when you're not doing circus, because it trains your body and your brain into a certain way of thinking. But in capturing this through video, I started realizing the angle of the camera, the way they look at the camera, or they don't look at the camera, portrays it completely differently or gives it different insights. And then it's like, well, who is the audience? Who is this for? It's like there's all these different levels and layers to working like this, which is new and fascinating, and they all each have such worth and gifts to show. Yeah,
that was a great synopsis. I think that's really interesting, and the thing that I'm finding most fascinated about this time is that need to be challenged to do something differently. I think, you know, any artist, when you get really used to your medium and ways of working, sometimes it's hard to break out of habits. Like, you actively have to do that. In this context, we've all been forced to break out of our habits, and I think it's going to lead to a really interesting moment and explosion of creativity. It's really challenging. I'm not kind of saying that this is a wonderful moment for the art form, but I think that that needs to be broke. That forcing out of habit is going to reveal quite a lot to us. Okay. Has anybody else been experimenting with creating at a distance? Rosie, I think you've been involved in the project as well, haven't you?
Hey, yeah. Through my work with Mimbra, Mimbra had a commission to create some choreographies that were kind of reflections on the everyday. So it was on the sofa, and it was sort of in each person's individual home, and yeah, how to express sort of just, or encapsulate just elements of each individual's experience at that time in lockdown. I have to say, I've been finding lockdown incredibly challenging. I have not found myself transitioning very well into the new medium. I'm sort of like rallying. This is personal, because I think Mimbra have absolutely embraced it, which is kind of what they do because they're so dynamic. Whereas, I felt sort of have been fighting against the camera and this, and what Natalie just so eloquently described about sort of jumping into the new medium and like regarding it as a new exploration and a different way of sort of framing and showing a little window. I've just ended up feeling like, if I can't touch people, if I can't climb on top of people and collaborate in that sort of skin to skin way, then I'm not interested. So I don't know. But what's nice about being here and listening to all of you is I feel a sort of renewed vigor, I think, that it is possible to collaborate, because I think that's what I've been finding hard, to feel like I truly can collaborate, and I'm not really interested in making work on my own. Yeah, I don't know if that.
I think that's a really interesting one. So Susan and Jerome, who's not in here, and I have been working on a project, and we were reflecting on what it was like to be at a distance from each other. And you know, as a director, I'm quite tactile, am I not, Susan? So that sense of not being able to give instruction physically through contact was really challenging for me, and thinking about how it's made me, by necessity, think much more carefully about how I articulate things. If that's all I get out of it, that's amazing. But yeah, I completely feel you, Rosie. It's a completely different way of working. Lee, you had your hand up, and then Barrett, I'm going to pull you into this as well, because you've been doing something really interesting.
Just something kind of started to solidify in my head there, and then what Rosie said, I think, really brought it home. And I think it's kind of a sense that I've been getting, that a lot of what quite a few people around me have been struggling with is that like feeling of being able to read the room, that if that's not there, then that's like such a huge barrier. Both in terms of the feeling, the connection with the people that are in the Zoom call with you or whatever you're doing, but also like as a performer or whatever you're doing in the situation that you're in. And actually, so I was just teaching a juggling class yesterday, and we did some showings at the end, and I did two different modes of showing. One where you know, the classic like split the group, half of you are going to show at the same time, and then the other half are going to show afterwards, versus like okay, go around the small group and each person show their individual work. And I could just feel that there was a total different tension or nervousness in the individual showing that was completely disproportionate to the amount of folk who were getting. And I think more to the fact that I realized by doing that I was spotlighting them, and so they were just seeing that, you know, rather than being able to see the whole group, which they did when we were watching, and they still had all of the faces staring back. And
Yeah,
kind of eye-to-eye connection, or that like ability to read what was going on, and I think that's really important. And I think that like distinction is helpful. Yeah. I feel like I might have dropped out there.
We lose you just a little bit. It might be better if you turn off your video, and then we can still get your wonderful vocal input, but maybe not see your face so much.
Is that clearer?
That's better. We can hear you now. Cool, thank you. Susan, you had your hand up as if you needed to respond to something Lee said, and then Barrett, I'm going to come to you.
Yeah, just Lee, what you said about the gauging of the room. What I've noticed though, and I think you said it as well in what you went on to say, our ability to perceive almost telepathically, almost through all of this, has increased. I'm much more able now to sort of feel what's going on. I teach a couple of classes a week to dance students, and I'm much more able to gauge what's going on with them now than I was in the beginning. And it's almost like we've developed some kind of through the screen telepathy or something. It's like when you take away one sense, another sense develops. And although it's been a really difficult process, I think we are actually finding, might sound a bit out there, psychic connection. Maybe I don't need to say it in that way, but we are finding a way to get connection. But then something else you said is also really interesting, that people are working in a bubble of their own private space. So there's a kind of disinhibition, like, you know, because there's not somebody watching in the real space, except that if you pull them out and then make them the spotlight, suddenly they feel very vulnerable and exposed. So you've sort of got the two extremes where people feel free to be a bit more themselves, but at the same time, we're in this isolation state that actually isn't conducive to being exposed. So it's a real paradox, I think, that is quite complex.
Maisie, did you want to respond to something that Susan was saying? Yeah, if you unmute yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, what Susan was saying was actually to me is actually very true to me. I find I look into myself a lot more during this period of time, and there was for over a month I wasn't very well, and also family issues as well. So when I started to feel better, I kind of realized that I feel very vulnerable in a way, and I look more into myself and see what kind of creativity with very limited. I haven't got much exposure to using my aerial equipment, even though depending on the weather, I've got a very simple rig in the garden, so I can from time to time use it. But because I'm not strong enough, it took me quite a while to kind of recover. I look more into creativity in the sense of for the short work that I've done, that I've created some verses which I've never used in my sketches, and I'm actually reformatting them, rewrite them, and it kind of helped me to focus more in myself. What do I want? What is important to me? So to me, even though the lockdown makes it very isolating, but yet it kind of made me more aware of what's happening around me and what's more important to me, etc. Maybe my art can incorporate that into it.
That's fantastic. Barra, finally, it's you. Do you want to? Sorry, I'll let you.
Yeah, I can let you know a little bit about what we've been doing. I guess for some of you who don't know me, I am a theatre maker, and I sometimes work a little bit at the National Centre and BATSBAP. And this year I was starting to look at how I might use digital technology in some of my outdoor work. Particularly a project we were doing with the National Trust about kind of what home means to people. And it got me starting to think about kind of how we've been very afraid of digital technology, or certainly kind of people that I know through the National Association of Street Artists have been very kind of afraid of using digital technology with their work. And I guess whether there was something kind of inherently analog about the way that we did things, and it was tactile, and it was all about that sense of, some of the things we've talked about kinesthetic empathy and about touch, and about whether digital technology kind of took us away from some of those things. So I got paired with Alan Richardson from Surge, and we had this brilliant conversation with about 20 artists, and it led to us starting a thing called Never There Festival. And we've just been doing our first online residency with 7 companies around making work in a digital space. So we've been online in a web XR space, so it's a VR building essentially. So it's a big outdoor tent which has lots of studio spaces where people can go and make work, and meeting rooms that people can book. And essentially you appear as an avatar in the space. You can bring in your video, you can bring in objects, 3D objects, and move them around. You can bring in text, you can bring in music. And it created a space for people to be able to work together and be together and see what was possible in terms of meaningfully bringing their work into an online space, and what that means for them as an artist, but also what tools are available to them. So we brought in digital experts from places like Yale University and Goldsmiths, and places like that, to really sit down with artists and people going, well, I really want to do this. And they go, well, actually, have you thought about this? Or maybe that's not possible right now, but maybe you can look in this direction. So I think people found it a really useful experience. It was really beautiful seeing people bringing in their their children, and just having people run around this 3D space and bumping into people and having these serendipitous conversations that you have during artistic residencies. And it's not all, it is so much that we're missing out on this social moments of being able to have that cross-pollination of ideas and talk about what we're doing, and being able to pull each other into our studios and show each other what we're working on, and being able to respond to one another. So it was a really, really exciting experience. And I guess just finally, one of the things that I would love to do would be to work with circus performers in a space like this, and treat it almost as a piece of circus equipment, and go, how can we go into the digital space, break it, play with it, and see what possibilities it holds for the art form, and being willing to not necessarily have something solid when we come out the other end, but just to have a play and understand how we can meaningfully bring our practice into those spaces. So yeah, that's a little bit of where I am and what we've been doing.
Got it. Thank you, Barra. That's really exciting. So the Never There Festival was it 2 weekends ago or 1 weekend ago?
It was on the, oh God, yeah, no, it was just over a week ago. So it was the 9th and 10th was the residency.
Yeah. And what did, oh, are you still there? Barra, are you still there? No, he's gone.
I'm back. It's my internet is rubbish. Sorry.
What for you was the thing that you're kind of taking away? Because I think, like, really thinking about how you adapt to deal with those restrictions. Is there anything that you're taking away from that, or anything that the people entering the space came away with?
There was a really kind of interesting conversation. The one that comes to mind immediately is the one with Pete Gunson from Piff Paff, who really gave some really beautiful feedback as a very recent. He's got another child, so being able to work from home in a digital space was kind of a bit of a game changer for him as a parent, working online, and that was fascinating. I think that we tried to really integrate access, so we worked with some visually impaired and deaf artists, and I think one of the things that I will definitely take away from that is that I guess that I thought that with it going into new spaces that people would the responsibility of people providing access is not to understand a new and to learn a new platform, it's to provide access for the artist. So that when they were there, they were like, oh, this is scary and I don't necessarily know how to use this technology, so I want to revert to a technology that I do understand. And I think that there was maybe a bridge within the process of moving into these spaces where you need to become acclimatized to them and move in and kind of look at the possibilities that are there. And also there's I guess an element of needing to work with the supporting parts of the industry, like people who provide access. Yeah, and there was another really interesting one around the possibility of online residencies, of being able to stretch residencies, because often we only have spaces for a very small amount of time, so residencies become very compressed, and that's really good sometimes. But also, what if you have a digital space that can just exist there, then you can have a residency happen on consecutive Mondays, give the space to the artist to continue to work on stuff, and then have the residency come in the next week, and you have more to present back. So it doesn't become this such a high octane, oh, I need to produce and I need to create, and it gives a little bit more time for reflection and growth through that residency process. So I think that was a really interesting thing that came out of it.
And just for clarity, were people working on and offline? Because, you know, there's this bridge between, like, what we do as circus practitioners is with the physical body.
Right.
Was there any bridging between?
Yes, yeah, totally. So it was that thing of having a studio space, a physical space that you could share with other people to stick resources up on the wall and ideas and pictures, but then also to be able to step back and stick your webcam screen up on the wall and move back and try things. So we had some clowning, we had a clown from Omadon in Northern Ireland who was working with visual artists who then would capture his video and pull it into a 3D environment using Blender. We had then some guys who were working digitally or trying to figure things out and then moving back and creating digital kind of little gizmos that responded to touch over distance. So he had one and his partner had one in another city, and as they touched the one in their physical space, the other one responded. So there was these creation of performance or physical objects in the real world, but being kind of created, and the process of discussing it and presenting it back to the audience happened within the virtual space.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's been overwhelmingly really positive. It's been really lovely.
Yeah. I think there's a little bit of an idea that we've started discussing about developing something that could be a test bed for trying out Barra's brilliant technology with circus artists, but watch this space. Okay. It's also okay to sit in silence and contemplate as well, if you're reflecting on what's going on. But if you have a question, do just put up your hands. Angeliki.
Oh, sorry. No, Angeliki. Yeah.
Angeliki and then Rosie.
Yeah, it's not so much as a question, but more as a thinking. Like, I was thinking that all this, the virtual technology vs artistic process, is something that has been going on like for many years and decades. Like, there is something there. And like now we're in this case where everyone needs to be online. And there is this difference, like we are somehow obliged to go into the online thing. Like when we were, at least in Greece, in this lockdown, it felt like, yes, we are ready to go on virtual thing, but then the lockdown came to an end, and then the everyday life came back somehow. And like personally, at least I'm really struggling to bring what the lockdown, what happened during the lockdown, to really keep it, because it's quite hard. While in the meantime, we need to find these digital tools to really go into, because it's again a new skill or a new world there. And there is another thing that is quite interesting, that being in this virtual, because we are obliged to be, and it's something that happens to everyone, there is this horizontal hierarchy where like we are in this Zoom room now because we want to do, and it's not just a scroll on the Facebook. So there is a very clear decision that is happening. And in the same times, we are really horizontally here, like there is no, this power relationship is shifting, and the knowledge is also shifting, because no one really knows how to use their tools. Even if they're like really into the digital or technology thing, you still somehow, the internet becomes more humanized, and you really need, again, to go, like no matter how many tools you have on 3D spaces, virtual places, or Blender, now you really need to go into this social and human thing. And this was really interesting to my mind during the lockdown, that now is shifting because real life is coming back. But yes, I don't know, it felt really nice. Like even now being in this space here, it's like somehow you can make decisions and you can really be aware. And at least personally, I feel that I understand this tool that it calls technology and internet more now than what was before, like being more consciousness about my decisions in the virtual place.
Absolutely. Rosie.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether anyone has either managed to or thought about bypassing the digital, but whether it's possible to do it responsibly. So is it possible at the moment, given that we still have to maintain social distance, is it possible to create somehow like live collective experiences that aren't mediated with the computer screen. And, you know, I suppose examples are, yesterday when I was cycling, there was a man playing amazing guitar in the underpass. And I mean, there were like 6 people who had a beautiful collective experience with him. And if there had been more people, then it would have probably got irresponsible, or, you know, but whether people are thinking about that as well.
Becky?
Well, I've by accident kind of had collective experience or shared my trainings with the neighbours, and there's a lady that has a balcony looking into the garden, and she's kind of like, oh, can you make sure the rig is in so she can see, because there's a tree and sometimes she can't see, and she was like, I like to watch. I was like, okay. But I mean, I've taught a lot of classes online. I just wanted to ask as well, but I haven't actually done any performance online, because I find when I've seen performances on Facebook or something, or even live streams of like DJ sets, the quality of the camera not being good enough, or like the delay, it just like, it completely ruins the experience for me. And I just wonder, is that something that, is it better for kind of our kind of stuff to be recorded so that it's a high quality and then people can enjoy it? Or is it that we just all need better equipment, which that's going to cost money? So that's, you know, we're not all of us have access to that kind of level of technology. But yeah, I'm more interested in maybe, you know, safe but outdoor performances, less than, I don't know, but that's maybe not yet.
Angeliki?
Yeah, I was also teaching during the lockdown, and like I was teaching every day the same time, and somehow the group was quite the same. Like there were these 5 people every day at the same time, and it was really, it was what was keeping me quite sane during this time. And what I realized is that a performance was happening. And like, although I'm struggling during my performances to keep them quite personal, like really being there, this happened naturally during these classes. So it was quite like the class, it was every day I didn't know what will bring up. Like it was, let's say, a handstand session, but it wasn't a handstand session. It could have been a shaky movement class, or a dancing with my chair thing, or just cry out in the camera. But somehow, really slowly, and because the group was this, and because it was a very clear decision of each of us to be on our Zoom app, it became this kind of performance. And then slowly I realized that there were people, because I was uploading all the videos on a Google Drive, or posting small parts of the videos on Instagram or Facebook, there were also people who were aware of what was happening. And somehow there were people knowing my living room, and they were discussing, oh yeah, did you see her living room, and this and that. And you are creating a performance space, and you are creating a performance itself that is just happening only because you are really performing. Because actually this is a performance, something that is happening in a concrete time with a very concrete mind. And it was really nice to see this happening on its own. Like at one time I tried to have this live Instagram thing, and it felt as a performance because I didn't know who was there, and I was really experimenting with this tool. I did it twice, and it was like, okay, the exposure is too much for me to take it now. But being in the Zoom, because it's this, everyone is coming because they want in an appointment, they have to follow some rules, you have to facilitate them by having a clear camera somewhere. And after the lockdown, because we met each other again in a physical space, it felt a bit weird in the beginning, like you're watching someone very famous in real life. So we're like, okay. But we still have this nice connection, and I feel very free to expose myself in a performative way still. But yeah, this.
I think that kind of idea of whether it, we've had discussions about this before, like digital versus live. I don't think the goal is ever that one will replace the other, and I think definitely in the UK we're coming to this point where we are starting to ease out of this immediate lockdown state. You know, there's still lots and lots of restrictions on what we can do. You know, one of the challenges that I'm really struggling with is the idea that I can't have people make physical contact with each other. So the kind of work that I normally make involves touch, constant touch, and reimagining what that might be for a live performance. That might, you know, it might be for the next few months. It might be something that we have to keep doing for a while longer until a vaccine appears. Who knows? But I am getting really interested in that kind of crossover between a virtual space and a live space, and what you can do in one and you can't do in the other, and how they can coexist and connect and support each other. Barra and then Lee.
Yeah, and I think there's something really interesting in that, you know, there are audiences that experience this kind of social isolation and separation from artistic opportunities outside of this period and outside of this time. And I think that it's really interesting that potentially we're learning all of these new skills that can really serve our community in a really interesting way. So it's not necessarily about kind of replacing, but it's about how it can add something new and new possibilities for new people accessing the art form. Something that's really interesting and exciting.
Cool. Lee.
Yeah, I'm just going to pause my video so hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah.
I just wanted to reply to Rosie in relation to like plans to do things that, you know, allow connection, and just share two of the ideas that I've been kind of involved in so far. So I know Norfolk State's looking at the potential to do performances on streets, so going in with kind of movable stages and platforms on wheels and being able to engage people from their doorsteps. So that's kind of one tactic that I'm kind of in conversations with. And then the other one is a project that I'm hoping to be able to do, which is about engaging people in parks. So going out in kind of borderline like walkabout sort of territory to obviously keep numbers small and to not be, you know, all of a sudden having 200 people standing very near to each other, but to kind of be roaming and performing and doing this, developing this idea with Sasha Joe, who's a contact improvised dancer. Unfortunately, we share a household, therefore we can kind of safely perform together. But really, we're looking to be able to rely on the fact that families as groups can interact with each other. And so looking at ways of kind of encouraging connection within families, and how families, you know, are able to support and hold and catch and those sorts of things, and get those sorts of connections with others.
Lee, that sounds lovely and right up our street. There's a library project that we have been working on that we are reimagining to work in those kind of much smaller clusters and be much more intimate performance events, but still lots of thinking to do about how that can work safely. Okay. There's Maisie, you put something in the chat. I'm relatively new to Zoom, but feel that despite there could be, sorry, I'm dyslexic, so I can't read out loud. Do you want to share what you put?
You were talking about digital formats. For example, Zoom, I kind of feel that there's always a distance. The interaction is not as close. Even though about the sensory, for live performance, you've got the sensory activation, which I think for digital formats, especially on Zoom, there's a little bit of a lack of it. But then again, maybe it's a good opportunity to think of how to change the way we work in order to kind of heighten certain things, maybe the use of different colors, design of the space that you might not actually initially put in your work, that you might change the texture of it, or the intensity of movement, using the level of tensions to kind of heighten certain feel of your work, or maybe using different filming angles. I kind of see people sometimes use filming from above or below, or close up, or really far, and depends on the speed of it. It might actually kind of captures people, the audience, even though they are quite far away. They're actually over a digital, they're viewing you on kind of a digital media. So that's what I want to say.
Alice, did you have your hand up a moment ago?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about parks and how they've become obviously very important, and how everyone's using them, and how they are actually a very kind of practical space to be doing performances in, and it's with being able to socially distance. But from my experience in the past, it's very, very hard to get into those spaces for performances, and councils generally are quite reluctant. I mean, I don't know what anyone else's experiences are, but for trying to do aerial stuff, the couple of times I've tried, it's been really hard. But I think that there is like a huge opportunity there, because that's where people are, that's where they are able to socialize, that is where they are able to gather, and that is where we are all still more or less able to stay safe, as long as everyone's respecting the rules. And so how to kind of normalize, you know, maybe every park should have a performance space, whether that is for circus or music or theatre, whatever it is, but maybe every park should be equipped with a space where there is electricity, where there is the possibility to perform, and that those spaces should become the performance spaces. And how you kind of manage that, I don't know, but I wonder if there's something in sort of campaigning councils to support and enable those spaces, because I have found that they don't really want to. It's a bit like working with schools. There's just too much going on. They don't really have the time and the energy to think about it.
It's a beautiful idea, and I'm going to put in the chat a group, an organisation called Outdoor Arts UK, and NASA as well, who are both organisations that are focused on work in the outdoors. NASA is a membership organisation that's kind of artist-led, and Outdoor Arts UK is more of an umbrella organisation, and they have regular Zoom meetings and chats, and those are exactly the kind of conversations they're having at the moment, is around the outdoor space becoming a space for people to, well, the outdoors have always been a space for people to present work, and there's kind of quite a developed ecology around it, but how actually it's so much more meaningful now and so much more necessary, and offers people not just entertainment but an opportunity for healing and connection. So I'll put those in the chat. Angeliki.
I think, like now what Alice said, there is also a need, again, from another reality, like going into Greek reality, where maybe things are not so organized, but also there is this need that things are happening, you don't know for how long or when, and you just have this need of reacting now. And like, at least from what I see now in Greece, it's like we need to regain a public space, and maybe a park is something that it feels quite good, but a park is also a place where everyone will go. So again, you will have this problem of too many people in a space. And then I was thinking like how we can really go into these small unseen spaces of a public, of cities and towns, where small performances are just popping up, and we can regain this very spontaneous connection with audience. Like also going back into the circus experience, this street performance that is just happening and then it's disappearing and it's going somewhere else. And this is something that we also need to do this. We need to have these reactions of things happening and then disappearing. So yes, a performance space into a park, it's an organized thing and it's also interesting, important, but going into the artist luggage, we also need to have our probably small props where small performances can just happen. And maybe it's not aerial because we have all this problem of the setups, but still the art needs to go everywhere. Like here we're working quite, because we cannot go into very public spaces like open parks because it's still unknown zone. So we really go into backyards and into abandoned spaces, but somehow people want to come and they're really open to join into things that are not so much organized. And they're really, you have again this commitment of time. Yeah, just this reclaiming the public space in all the means.
Cool. I think we're going to be called back into the main session in 20 seconds. But it's been a great conversation. I'm going to shut up because we're going to be logged out in 8 seconds and I'll say what I was going to say in the other room. Bye. Hello.
Okay, just waiting for everyone to come through. Hello. I think that's us all here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's us.
Cool. Welcome back to the main room, everyone. I'm sure there's a lot of curiosity about what happened in the other rooms, and it might be good just as a closer for anyone to share a few snippets of the conversation that came up. Kate, I'm looking at you.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you looking at me. Well, I thought you might do this, so tried to find out what was useful. We had a lovely conversation. I think I found it really useful, and it was great because we had a real range of people still studying, emerging artists, and what we call wise artists, which was really great to have a whole range of experience and questions. So what was particularly affirming was the amount of positivity in the room, and really, leaning back on those skills that we know we have as circus performance of creative problem solving and resilience and collaboration and entrepreneurship, but then also talking a little bit about what's happening in the sector and the little opportunities that are beginning to come up, and how we can also create opportunities. There's Charlie Wheeler said something fantastic, which was it's really difficult to fail at the moment, and Mark Moreau was also talking about thinking back to, I hope you don't mind me saying this, Mark, back to the 80s and going out and just doing stuff, and that there's a bit of a feeling of returning to that, and how we sort of teach those chutzpah skills of kind of just getting out there and being brave, and that all felt really energized. And then we also talked about the hard skills that we need. Oh, we also had a really very brief discussion, because I think we all agreed on a sort of excellence or diversification, and we felt in the room, diversification at the moment is key. So then thinking about the extra skills that we need as artists to be able to diversify, to negotiate that landscape. So thinking about, the sort of whether it's writing official documents or fundraising or thinking about marketing or digital, you know, just really thinking about the extra skills that potentially we need and where we can go to get that. So really trying to sort of pin it down in whether it's people we know. Rowan, who's a student at Circus Media at the moment, was talking about imposter syndrome, that you know, when you're a graduate you feel, am I good enough? So out of that we started talking about possible sort of mentoring, and I can't remember who suggested, I think Phoebe suggested maybe working out some sort of buddy system of just being each other's cheerleaders moving forwards, which I think is a really great idea. Then also thinking about ways, so Lynn, Carol was talking about the most important things at the moment is communication amongst our own sector, but also to the wider world, of the value of what we do. And Ruby Burgess was talking about going out there and proving the value of what we do, whether that's in our own communities. Phoebe had a great idea of going into the NHS and doing stuff with mental health. And then we talked about various conferences. So Circus Works conference is coming up. Lynn was telling us about that. I think that's about it. Have I missed anything? Or would anybody like to add?
Well, the videos will be available online for anyone who wants to take a deep dive and kind of watch the whole discussion. I'll be fairly brief about summing up our room. It was a really, really stimulating discussion about different experiences people have had creating and collaborating online. And we really went into all of the challenges that people were actually experiencing in connection and finding ways to address that in directing or communicating and collaborating at a distance. Angeliki has written a really beautiful booklet from the process that she had of hosting an aerial residency online with people who didn't have access to their equipment but were thinking about how they could use how they could interrogate their aerial practice. Am I articulating it correctly, Angeliki? Yeah, okay, she's nodding and thumbs up, so that's not too bad. There were some great examples from Lee Tinian about an exploration that he's doing at the moment with performance contexts online, mixing as close as you can have to a live audience on Zoom and a distance audience on Facebook Live, and kind of playing with that environment and what it offers him as a practitioner. Barra was sharing a really exciting digital residency that they hosted recently, where people were actually working in these online spaces together, you know, having collective space and private studio space online to share ideas, and that was a really exciting offer. We talked about the challenges in translating something that is a kinesthetic practice, how we work, not just what it is that we do, and finding a way to make that work at a distance. You know, how do you articulate and direct somebody when you're used to doing that through touch and physical communication? Freya, I think you had your hand up.
I was just trying to look at the chat.
Oh, okay, cool. And again, that's been filmed and recorded, so we will be uploading that to share for anyone who wants to listen in on the conversation. There were some really, really interesting things that were coming up. Cool. Unless anybody has anything that they want to jump in and say or share, I think we've probably had just about enough Zoom for now. Wonderful. It's been a real pleasure to see you all. We are now starting to kind of slowly ooze, I'm calling it an ooze, out of lockdown. I have a feeling that we might be back again, but anyway, no comment about our government there. But there is a transitional moment that's happening here where all of this experience, what we have captured through this moment, could just dissipate. And I'd really encourage anyone who has the time or the capacity just to find a way to log some of the things that have come out of this lockdown moment for them, before we kind of go into another process where we're all running and we forget the knowledge and the learning that we have gained in this moment. Cool. All right, thank you so much. And we will see you again. We're coming back in 3 weeks, Emma?
Yeah, we haven't quite set the date yet, but I will let you know as soon as we have. We should know by the end of this week. And I'll put the stuff together, but just to say, it'll probably take me a couple of days, I think. So hopefully I'll get it all out to you by the end of the week with the chats and everything. And just to highlight the Surge Cabaret tonight, I've put in the chat. I would totally recommend coming along. And yes, Lee will be there. Yay! Looking forward to it.
Very cool. And again, if anyone has a burning topic of conversation that they want to bring out to the community, please do get in touch, and I'm sure we can find a way to facilitate that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks.
Hey
mate.
I'm going to stop recording.
Oh, yes.